my name's Elora and I work at the Compost Education Centre. I hope you're having a great Pro D Day, and the Compost Ed Centre is teamed up with the Greater Victoria Public Library today to bring you this video, and we're going to be talking about seeds today. So I'm standing here in my garden, and as you can tell, it kind of looks like summer's come to an end. Our sunflowers are starting to wilt, and a lot of the plants have already made all their fruit. It's the end of the season and things are starting to die. But that doesn't mean that there's not lots of fun things to still do in the garden at this time of year. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about that, and that topic is seeds. So let's launch right into it. We're going to be going around looking at different seeds as we talk, but before we do that, I actually want to start by talking about what are seeds and how are they made. So I'm sure you have a little bit of an idea of what is a seed. Seeds are usually pretty small, and sometimes they're things that we eat, but usually we think of a seed as something that grows into a plant. Could grow into a tree, could grow into a really small plant, could grow into pretty much any kind of plant. Almost all plants produce seeds. Only a few don't. Some of those plants are something like ferns that you might see when you're out in the forest, but most all plants you're familiar with produce a seed to grow into a new plant. And the seed has all the information in it that it needs to create a new plant that's very similar to the plant that it came from. So if we know that a seed is something that makes a new plant and it has all the info in a little packet, let's talk a little bit about how those seeds are made. So I'm going to walk over this way a little bit, and I want us to take a look at this flower in a second. But first, I'm wondering if anyone's heard the word pollination before. Is that a word that anyone's familiar with, pollination? There's one part of that word that's really key to what we're talking about, and that's pollen. So pollen is a really important part of the word pollination. And maybe you'll know what pollen is. And actually, if we take a close look at one of these flowers, you can see this yellow part of the flower is creating pollen. Maybe we'll see some on my finger, maybe not. But if you see a flower like this, it's got yellow in the center, maybe one day try rubbing your finger on it and see if you can get some pollen off on your finger. So now that we know what pollen is, let's go back to that word pollination. So what pollination means is very simple. All it means is moving pollen from one flower to another flower. And that's actually how a seed is made. So in this situation, pollen might need to move from this flower to this flower, just kind of like what I'm doing with my finger. And sometimes a human might come along and move pollen, and sometimes actually the wind might blow pollen along, but often there are some animal friends or some critters that like to do this for us. Has anyone heard of the word pollinator? It's another word that has pollen in it. Sounds a lot like pollination, and maybe you actually have an idea of a bug or an animal that's a pollinator. Does anyone have any ideas of what bug or what animal might be a pollinator? I have one friend here with me, and his name is Bumble. Can everyone say hi to Bumble? Bumble here is a good friend of mine, and he's a pollinator, just like I'm talking about. So Bumble goes about his day, and he's looking for food. And his favorite food to eat is pollen. So when Bumble sees a flower like that flower below me right now, he's gonna think that looks like a really yummy snack. And he might dive down to the flower and he might eat some pollen of this flower, nom, 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 nom. And when he's had enough pollen from this flower, he might fly over to this flower over here and eat some pollen over there. And when Bumble does that, he's moving pollen. He's moving pollen from here to here to here to here to here to here. And that's pollination. And we just learned that pollination is what makes a seed. So if we take a look at this flower, this is actually a great example. We've got some flowers that are still producing pollen. And then we've got some flowers, let's see, this one is kind of starting to die. And then we've got some flowers like this one. You can see their petals, you can just pull them right off, are totally dead. It doesn't look like a flower anymore. And that means it's starting to produce seeds. So after the flower comes the pollination and then the seed. So let's see, if I take some of these out of here, this one's not quite ready. Let's see if I can find one. If you take a look at this one here, This one's lost all its petals. It's probably been a long time since it had petals and looked like the pink flowers up top, but it has produced all of its seeds. So if I pull gently on this, yeah, I'm gonna get some seeds in my hand. So there's probably 10 or 15 seeds in here, a couple dried up petals too. And these seeds are totally ready to grow into a new plant, just like this one. So that's kind of the cycle of seed to flower. I could take these seeds and I could go, and I could sprinkle them all over my garden, and I might get 20 more plants, just like this, growing into this beautiful flower, which by the way is called a cosmos flower. So we learned a lot just now. We learned a little bit about what is a seed. We learned a little bit about how seeds are made, and we learned that our friend Bumble here is an important friend for pollination. And does anyone else have a guess on what another friend might be that helps us pollinate? We know bumblebees like Bumble are pollinators, but there's lots of other animals too. So maybe think for a second, if there's any other animal you can think of that would be a good pollinator besides bees. Maybe you thought of butterflies. Wasps actually are great pollinators. Flies, moths, all sorts of animals can be pollinators just like Bumble. And then once they visit the flower and they visit another flower and pollen gets moved between two, then we saw that you can create some seeds. And that's our cycle from flower to seed that we just learned. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about what seeds are and how seeds are made, let's look at one seed in particular. And to do this, I've brought my friend Beanie with me. And Beanie, you might be able to tell, is one big, giant, blown up bean. And he's got a couple special things about him that we'll take a look at. The first is actually Beanie's belly button. So if you can believe it, lots of seeds, and this bean has a belly button just like we do. And it does the same thing ours does. It at one point attached us to a parent or a parent plant in this case. So if you've ever seen peas in a pod or beans in a pod, that's what this belly button on Beanie was doing, was attaching him to the pod. But he doesn't really need it anymore because he's out here by himself, and he's actually wearing a nice hard coat to protect him until he's ready to grow. But wearing this coat forever would kind of be like wearing your baby clothes forever. It's not gonna fit you. And let's pretend it's springtime, it's getting warm, Beanie's ready to grow. Beanie's coat would need to come off. But before we do that, we need to figure out what are the 4 things Beanie needs to grow into a plant. And you might already know some of these. Some of them are maybe things that you've done before when you helped grow plants in your garden or at school, and I'm gonna go through them. So the first thing that all seeds need to grow into a plant is water. So maybe if you're at home, you can sprinkle your fingers with me. I'll sprinkle some imaginary water on Beanie. And that is the first thing Beanie needs, is some water. All right, so we'll keep sprinkling water. And what do you think the second thing Beanie needs is? Well, the next thing I'm gonna name is sun. So maybe for sun, we'll rub our hands together. Imagine the nice warm heat of the sun shining down on Beanie, making him nice and warm. He's got his water, he's got his sun. The third thing Beanie needs is some soil to grow in. So I've got lots of soil behind me. I'll sprinkle some soil on Beanie. It's gonna get kind of dirty. And imagine Beanie's getting fully covered in soil. So Beanie's had some water, some sun, and some soil. The last thing Beanie needs, oops, I think I got some soil on my face, is a little trickier, and that's air. So there's air all around us, so we don't really need to worry about that here. But so we remember, I'll blow some air onto Beanie. All right, so we had water, we have sun, we have soil, we have air. Beanie is ready to take off his winter coat and start growing. Okay, off comes the baby clothes. And inside, Beanie looks a little different. Ooh, okay, you kind of get a peek on what's inside of Beanie, but all of this part that kind of looks like a nice soft pillow is actually food. And when we eat beans, this is what gives us energy, is all of this food storage. But when it's time for a little plant to grow out of this bean, this is what gives the plant energy to grow too. So once Beanie has all the things they need, there's 2 little leaves that live inside every bean that are gonna start to get ready to grow. And once they get their water, their sun, their soil, and their air, they might pop out. And at the same time, Beanie's got to get into the soil. So a root is going to come out of the bottom of the bean, and it's going to find a home in the soil so it can get nutrients and water and everything it needs to grow. And eventually, you won't really see this bean anymore. You'll just see a nice big plant growing into a bigger and bigger and bigger bean plant. And maybe eventually, it'll make its own bean pods. And that tells you a little bit about the seed to plant and more seed life cycle that we talked about earlier with those pink flowers. All right, well, thank you so much, Beanie. We learned a little bit here about what's inside of a bean. And actually, this is a really easy experiment for you to do at home. If you have just normal beans, kidney beans, anything like that, you can soak them in water overnight. And once they get nice and soft in the morning, you can crack them open in half, just like this. And you'll actually be able to see 2 little leaves and a little root inside the bean. So that's an experiment you could do at home to do this yourself and take a look at the little leaves and the little root and learn a little bit more about what's inside of a seed. All right, friends, well, we've learned a lot about seeds so far. We learned what is a seed, we learned how are seeds made, and we just learned a lot about what's inside of a seed and what the 4 things are that seeds need to grow. So see if you can remind yourself what those 4 things are. Water, sun, soil, and air. And sometimes we say there's a 5th secret ingredient, and that's love that you need to make a seed grow. So what we're going to talk about now is actually why seeds travel. So maybe you don't think of a seed as something that would like to go on a trip, but I'll tell you that seeds actually love to go on trips. And they don't go on trips the same way we do, by, I don't know, walking around or riding their bike, but they do have some pretty interesting ways of traveling. So let's take a look at this tree behind me. There's a beautiful fig tree here, and it doesn't have many figs left now, but when it did, maybe you can imagine that those figs are full of seeds, because they are. And if all those figs drop to the ground right here, there could be maybe 1,000 fig seeds that drop in this one small area. Do you think 1,000 fig trees could grow right here under this big tree that's already taking up lots of sun? I don't think so. The seeds that fall from a big tree like this, or even from a big tall flower or a big tomato plant like this, need to find a new place to grow, because usually growing right under your parent plant, it's taking up all the sun, isn't a good idea. You need to get your own sun and your own water. You don't want to be competing with all these plants around you. So because of that, seeds need a really good strategy to get somewhere else, to travel, to go on a trip. And seeds have a lot of interesting ways of doing that. So I've got some cool seeds with me that we'll take a look at, and we'll talk about how they might like to travel. So some seeds like this come in a little package that's filled with air. Maybe I'll let you take a closer look at this one. So this seed might be really good at blowing in the wind, or maybe it likes to float on the water because it's got almost like a life jacket on it. So this seed might blow off a plant, and maybe it lands in a river and it goes on a long trip down the river, and then it falls onto the side of the riverbed and it finds a new place to grow there. Some seeds are especially good at flying, so much so that they look like a tiny little wing. And maybe you've seen one of these before. They come from maple trees. So if you have any maple trees around you, then you might be able to see one of these. And if you're lucky, you can get it to fly for you. So we'll see if this works. I'm gonna drop this, and hopefully it spins around like a helicopter all the way to the ground. Woo! Awesome. So some seeds can float, some seeds can fly, some seeds are like little wings, they're so good at flying, and some seeds have some other special ways of traveling. So this seed here doesn't really look like much, but we'll call this seed a sticky seed. It travels because of how sticky it is. So if I was going on a walk and I walked by a plant, this seed might get stuck to me. And then maybe I go on a long trip and I go, I don't know, all the way down to the beach, or maybe I go all the way to France and I accidentally bring this seed with me. This seed's having the best day of its life. It just got a free ride. It didn't have to do anything. And it's found an entirely new place to grow, where it's not getting shaded out by another plant, or it's not competing with hundreds of other seeds. So some seeds are really sneaky and they travel by being sticky. It's so sticky it can stick to my fingers. And maybe you've had some of these stuck to you in the woods before. Okay, what other kinds of seeds do I have here? I've got a couple more that might be really good floating seeds. And some are so small that just a gust of wind might blow a couple seeds off of them. So there's lots of interesting ways seeds can travel. And they can look all sorts of different ways. They can be big, they can be small, they can be really rock hard, they can have a packet around them, they can be out on their own, and those are all different ways to help them get somewhere and also to protect them until they're ready to grow. So some seeds like this are almost rock hard, and if I put it on the ground and stomp on it, it's not gonna break. This seed is really, really well protected, and you might have noticed most seeds, at least until you cook them, are pretty hard. That's on purpose because those seeds need to stay safe. If they've got a long trip ahead of them, or they need to wait until there's a warm sun next spring for them to grow, they need to make sure they stay in one piece until then. So if you ever see a seed that's really hard, that's why. The seed's trying to protect itself. It's a smart thing to do. It's like Beanie's coat that we saw earlier. A nice hard coat keeps it protected until it's ready to grow. So we've seen a couple different kinds of seeds, and I've got some more in here. I've got pine cones that have seeds in them. I've got a bean pod, kind of like what Beanie might have come from, something like this. And I've got a bean, just like Beanie. I've got seeds that come, ooh, my sticky seed is stuck to another seed head. I've got all kinds of seeds that I found just within 5 minutes of my house. So maybe if you have an adult at home and you want to go on a seed walk, you can go and you can try to find a seed that you think would float, a seed that you think would fly, a seed that maybe will stick to you, and a seed that you think is really, really well protected. And I actually have a favorite story that talks about the journey seeds go on, and it's called The Tiny Seed by Eric Carle. So if you're interested in reading a story about how seeds go on really, really long and sometimes really hard journeys to find a new place to grow, you can look up that book, The Tiny Seed by Eric Carle. Maybe you can get it from the library, or maybe you can borrow it from a friend, or even find a video of someone reading it on YouTube. All right, well, I think that's it about how seeds travel. All right, well, what I want to talk to you a little bit about now is saving seeds. As I mentioned before, it's the end of the summer. Maybe you helped out in a garden this year, you grew lots of things have come to a close, but it's actually the perfect time to go out and save some seeds for next year. That way you don't have to buy seeds again, and it's pretty cool knowing that those seeds came from the same plant that you grew the year before. So saving seeds can be a really, really great way of getting the same plant you had before. Like if you had a really, really nice tomato plant that you grew this year and you said, wow, I love that tomato. I want to make sure I have the same tomato next year. You can get some seeds from inside that tomato. And some seeds, like a tomato or a pepper or a cucumber, need to be planted every year. Seeds from a fig tree don't need to be planted every year because that fig is going to stay year after year. It's not going to die every winter. A tomato plant will. So you want to make sure you save some seeds if you want to have tomatoes again next summer. And saving seeds can be pretty easy. So I've got some plants in front of me that are perfectly ready to be have some seeds collected from them. So what you want to make sure is you want to make sure your plant is kind of dry, or at least that the part that the seed's on is dry and ready to be collected. So if I take a look at these used to be peas, and some of these have actually already popped open. You can see there's no seeds inside. But if I look down here, this looks like the perfect seed pod. If I rattle it, I can even hear the peas inside. So what I would do is I'd pick off this seed pod, and then I would crack it open. Perfect. So when I crack it open, you can see it's got some peas inside, but they don't really look like yummy peas anymore because they're all dried up. They're kind of dark, they're pretty hard, they wouldn't be a good food anymore, but they're perfect seeds. So then what I would want to do is I'd want to take these seeds, I'd want to store them somewhere, ideally in a paper bag, in a paper envelope, somewhere they're not going to get wet and somewhere they're not going to get moldy. So you want to store them in a dry, cool place in paper, and then next year you can use these seeds to grow more pea plants. Another plant that's ready to have its seeds saved is this poppy plant. So this poppy head looks pretty beautiful, but if I break it off like that and shake it, whoa, I get thousands and thousands of poppy seeds from one plant. I could break off another one and I could just keep getting poppy seeds. Think about how many poppy flowers I could grow next year with these seeds. And then I can just blow them away and plant them when I'm ready in the spring. So maybe take a look around your garden or even on your street, on the boulevard, if you can find any plants that are ready to have their seeds collected. And if you do find some, maybe you can pick off one little pea pod or one little poppy seed head. You can take those seeds home and save them. You can even label them in a nice pretty envelope and write poppy seeds 2022 or beautiful pink poppies from my garden so you remember what they are, and then you can plant them next spring. So that's something you can do in the next couple weeks as all the plants keep drying out. Maybe even before the rain comes is a great time to do it. All right, well, friends, thank you so much for tuning into our video today. It's been a pleasure to make this video for the Greater Victoria Public Library. I'm Elora from the Compost Education Centre, and we would love to have you come visit the centre sometime if you haven't before. Our site's located at 1216 North Park in Fernwood, and we offer workshops for adults, for children, and all kinds of educational resources if you want to stop by. And if you have any questions, you're always free to reach out to us. We love providing people in the community information about composting, gardening, and more. Thanks so much. Bye.